Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Another special guest here with me today, Sophie Rukin. Hello, Sophie. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, happy to be here.
So, a lot of you PFers will not know Sophie, but you should because Sophie has been an incredible debater in some other styles, especially parley. So, in high school, Sophie did like this high school American parley that we'll talk about later in the interview. It's largely like the NYPDL stuff. I think that other people on my channel, like Ryan Lafferty, have done something similar. In that format, she was the number one ranked junior. She won the whole like NYPDL Championship, which is like our TOC equivalent. She top spoke like 10 or 15 tournaments, just casually and won like four to five others. Then she just graduated recently, and last year was a freshman on the Brown Debate Union team, which I used to be the president of. So cool, like, continuing legacy. At Brown, she did APDA and was most famously now the top speaker of Nats in varsity, which is incredible as a novice in APDA. Also got to Octos at Nats, simied a lot of other tournaments like NYU in her like third tournament ever on the circuit, which is incredible, again in varsity. And of course, won BU Novice, which is the first tournament where all the novices compete with each other. So, very happy to have you on. I feel like this will be really interesting, unique perspective. I say that like all the time with everyone on my channel, but I actually genuinely think that this will be probably the most like unique debate background that I will have talked to. Because everyone else I talk to is like, oh, I did policy in PF, or oh, I did PF, or oh, I did LD. Or oh, I did like world schools, then I went to British Parley. Which like fair enough. But I feel like this is something new and different, which I'm excited about because I think you'll have different assumptions about how debate works that I want to unpack. But first, can you just like introduce yourself? Who is Sophie Rukin?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Hi, I'm Sophie. You gave a great background of my debate career. Probably hear I have a cough. It'll go away. But I go to Brown, love it. First year, I've really enjoyed doing APTA so far. I've coached a little bit of debate too. Ran a couple debate programs, created a debate summer camp. Debate's been like my whole life since I was a sophomore in high school. I mean, not my whole life. I have friends, but like a lot of my life, as I'm sure a lot of people here who can relate. And yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Well, I have some questions about your debate experience, so we can use that to start to fill in your introduction as well. First of all, I gotta ask, like, what is this kind of event that you did in high school? What is American high school parliamentary all about?
So, American high school parliamentary debate is kind of like APTA for those who are familiar, but I'll explain it differently. So, it's the same. Well, okay, there's an East Coast and a West Coast. I'm from New York, so I pretty much did East Coast for the most part of my high school career, and I did a little bit of the West Coast. But East Coast, there's no research, 15 minutes of prep, new topics every round. There are like three topics every round, and then there's this weird situation that goes on to figure out who
Oh,
like
like
debating
Austrians.
on what side. No, but it's different. Like,
Okay.
okay, I can try and flip a coin. The winner of the coin toss gets to decide if they want motion or side. And you're always going to pick side because you want to pick the better side on the motion that they pick. So then the other team picks motion. And there's like a whole different way in which you pick this. And then you debate. This is like a really unique and hard thing that's really interesting to think about, deciding what's the most even motion within like a minute is your max time, and then what side's better within a minute of max time, because sometimes it's not intuitive and sometimes it's not what you think, and you have to cater to judges. But that is like the base time, and then you prep with just you and your partner, and it's the same speech times as high school, as college parley, so it's like more, I assume, different than PF. I've judged before, I know it's different,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of fun. Um, and yeah, in
Okay, wait,
terms of the,
I'll
yeah,
stop you right now because
go.
you'd think that everyone on my channel knows APTA, but I don't think that's the case.
Okay.
So can we just like explain for a second APTA speech times and like the parts of APTA that are related to this event?
Okay, so after speech times, it goes 7 minutes, which is the PMC, and APTA in cases debate, which is the majority of APTA. The Gov Pro team has a pre-written case, they read it, and that's their entire speech time. And then it's LOC, which is 8.5 minutes, same in high school parley. They don't have a prepped case, and they have 15 minutes to then prep that. And come up with a speech, give their case, and respond. Then there's two 8.5 minute rebuttals from either side, so Gov and then Op. And then there's the Op block, which is a 4.5 minute speech from the leader of opposition, who's the first Op speaker, where no new points can be brought up. And the main point of it is just weighing and explaining which arguments the most important in the round. And then their last speech is the PMR by Gov. The first speaker gives it, and you just sum the round, weigh, do all of that kind of stuff.
So your event in high school also had three speeches on both sides,
Same,
same time.
same
Okay,
times, all
cool.
the same.
And then you were saying that there's like some differences with the different coasts, I guess.
Okay, yeah. So on the East Coast, it's like very big, dynamic, like very controversial things happen between the two sides. So the East Coast is largely run through this organization called the NYPDL, New York Parliamentary Debate League, and it's a student-run organization, which I assume is super foreign to like almost anyone. But I think it is truly, truly awesome. I was a big part of it while I was in high school. And I think it's mostly awesome because the online tournaments are free, which means anyone can do it with like basically no experience. And they're really accessible and run by students who are more than happy to help, who are working every weekend to like found new teams and new schools and will coach for free. It's a really like fantastic, wonderful organization and it is ever growing. And now the NYPDL, which is New York Parliamentary Debate League, has in-person tournaments in California and in Pennsylvania and growing across the country. And I think it's really awesome. And then there's the California, and a lot of this is student run. So East Coast is very, very just like students coaching their own teams, all of that. And then there's the West Coast, which is different. There's 20 minutes of prep time. Research is allowed. Um, and they have progressive debate. So there's critiques and there's theory. It's, I assume, different than it exists in PF. And people will argue that Parley is not a good format for critiques because your topic has to link into the critique, but you don't know what your topic is until right before. So the like K's that come in are kind of not always like relevant even slightly to the round. And then it's also considered inaccessible because if an East Coast debater where K's are banned comes, they don't like know how to interact with the argumentation. And it's largely coached by coaches and huge coaching staffs. But it's like very, there's a lot of differences, a lot of ideological splits in terms of like what debate should be.
That makes sense. That's so interesting. Wow. And so like you did a little bit of both, right? I guess mostly East Coast. But you were right in like that. You were experiencing all of those ideological rifts in real time, which is really interesting.
Yes.
So you said on the East Coast, certain arguments like K's are just they're just flat out banned. Like, how does that work? Because that's something I've been discussing a lot with people is like how the rules actually affect legitimate arguments.
So, like, it's as simple as in the rules of the NYPDL, they're not allowed explicitly, like, auto drop if you run a K. If arguments are like considered Ks and someone calls them out, you can get dropped. Theory is heavily discouraged in the rule book. And it's just not widely done. And I think that is a factor of you learn from the people who are older than you. And if the people on your team tell you that Ks are bad or that Ks are not something we do or don't teach you how to run a K, you're never running a K because it's not something you're exposed to. So it ends up not existing because the people around you don't do it and don't like feel an incentive to do it. And I've had a lot of thoughts about it throughout my experience. And I think a large part of the reason why we don't have as much progressive debate on the East Coast is one, because the students are so involved and can really advocate for what they want in their debate space. The
Mhm.
equity is the way you want the equity to be because you are the equity officers and you want the debaters around you to be treated in an equitable way because you're the only person who can control it. And you get a vote at like your NYPDL board or whatever, which is really powerful. And I think the second reason is just the topics. So they're super, super approachable to really powerful and like personal arguments. Like you're going to have a feminism round almost every single tournament you do. So
Right.
like at that point, maybe since you're not always debating a policy, you're less inclined to do it. Um, and so then people, I don't even think there's ever really been much of a desire to have them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Although it's strange then that there is a desire on the West Coast. Like, where does this arise from? Is it from the
So
structure?
So the topics are very different.
Mm,
You're basically debating it's the system is all different. So it will change how you're selecting motion every single tournament. And there's not really a standard league. So every tournament has semi-different rules. But generally, I've done a couple of the tournaments, and almost all of their topics are policy. They actually have this, they have a circulation. So there's policy, fact, and value. Fact resolutions to me are some of the strangest things I've ever seen, which is like the resolution will be TikTok will be abolished. And
Right,
then it's
right.
the preponderance of evidence who can like acquire more evidence to prove why something is more likely to happen. And then they have like value as to like climate change more important than poverty, and then like policy. So they don't end up having that level, and also it's very coach run. And it's been there for a long time. So I think it's also different in that way.
That makes sense. You mentioned that some of the East Coast debaters sort of go over to the West Coast and then they get like clapped by K's that they understand. I would assume that it's more the opposite. Like if there's some weird esoteric arguments on the West Coast, even if some of them are banned or some argument styles are not banned, right? So then I would assume that some West Coast debaters would come over to the East Coast and try to like push the envelope on what's accepted a bit. But I don't know if that has happened or does happen or
So most of the West Coasters who like run K's and like theory um don't come because they think it's stupid
oh, that
because
makes sense
they
actually.
can't like their format of debate is banned
Yeah.
and their coaches think it's a bad format. And a lot of them think it's actually bad that there's no paywall to like be able to do a tournament. So they don't come for
Oh,
a bunch of reasons. But I think some have come over. Like attempts to run a lot of the arguments that are familiar to West Coasters, even if it's not K's, they usually don't like violate the rules. Um, don't like it's your different judges, different judge pools, different debaters. They get engaged with differently. People lose a lot when they're not on their coast.
That's interesting. That's really interesting because I feel like this is something that historically has happened with APTA. There's like the whole like I don't know if you know about this, but there's like the North versus South split. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And like it used to be that this was like such a huge divide where like the South split was like the Southern East Coast, like DC and everything around it and below was like super tech and fast, and the North was all like, no, we're gonna go super slowly and have good rhetoric. But nowadays they're kind of like meshed together. Like you don't really see this divide as much, in my opinion. I wonder if the future of high school parley is to like slowly like reach across and bridge that gap.
I think that, like, I hope and think that's where it's going. I hope, like, there are more young people involved who care deeply about the format, like, having more of a say. And I think that's when people want to merge the divide, that's when it happens. And, like, people who were my friends and slightly older, like, did fight for that. But I think it's, like, totally dependent on what people are fighting for and want in the first place because you have your own tournaments. So it's only up to you if you want to make them different.
That makes sense. I guess one case for pessimism about this is like maybe the difference is that like they're different kind of structures. Like the East Coast seems much more student run and like literally has different rules. Like they have a formal rule book, I guess. Whereas the West
Yeah, sort of.
like are the West Coast tournaments run by adults?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Like the
right.
simple answer is yeah. I think it's like you don't want to come to a league that says you don't have a place. And I think that makes sense for why there is a difference and maybe will be for a long time.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of also like I mean it kind of feels like two different formats. Like PF and policy. And there's a bit of a divide between those as well because of the difference in like they're literally two different leagues, I guess.
They're similar. They're like you can do it. An East Coast team won the West Coast TOC. So like it's
Eh.
definitely possible, but like they're definitely different formats and you have to prep a lot as an East Coast team to be able to do it and vice versa.
Yeah, that makes sense. What advice would you have for people who are in high school parley? I don't know how many of those viewers I have, but like if I do, like how can you get better?
How can you get better? Okay. High school parley is a hard activity to get better at because you can't just memorize like how all the evidence. And it's a lot of teaching yourself how to think differently. And I think there's like a couple which are like ways which everyone will tell you, and like maybe they're basic, but I think they're definitely true. You should watch a lot of rounds and you should listen to a lot of rounds and you should pause the speech and then think about what you would say and maybe even give that speech, then hear the speech and think about how you would do it differently. And you should watch a lot of YouTube videos that do exist and read resources that do exist and sign up for the free summer camps or try out a tournament. And I think like the overall best possible way to get better at debate is to do it and do it with people who are better than you. Like, I promise there are people out there who will happily do a round with you, especially in high school parley, because that's like the whole point. Um, and you should ask them to do rounds, and you should ask them what you could do better. Or you, if you hate a great debater in a round and they destroy you, message them on like Discord or whatever and be like, hey, do you have any thoughts as to what I could have done better? Because they want to help. And like getting help from other people, I think, is one of the best ways to get better.
That's crazy. I just interviewed Ceci the other day, and she said like all of the exact same things about
I
APTA.
love that.
Um, yeah, I mean, I obviously totally agree with all of this. It's interesting. So, I guess the next question is, what advice do you have for people who are not doing Parley? Like, what's the, I guess, the elevator pitch for why they should come and try it?
Okay, so what everyone tells you if you are like actually going to join Parley is it's the only format that they do in college, which to some extent is like vaguely true. Like you're more likely going to see Parley than you're going to see other formats in college, like especially if you're on the coasts, or the East Coast at least. I think there's NPDA and like a couple other things, but
Yeah.
those are still Parley. So you're more likely to see Parley if you go to college, which is true. So if you want something that's transferable that you can continue to do, that's probably a good reason. I think like real reasons are that people will say parley is fake debate. That's what I heard every single day of high school when I would like sit there and hold my parley practices and we had half the people that the PF team had. And I think it's everyone thinks it's fake debate because debate is research and debate is like being able to back things up with fact and like not knowing things is not real. And I think we need to think about more deeply why we do debate. And if you do debate to like think critically and learn about the world and be able to craft arguments, then parley is the best way to do it because you have no one holding your hand. You have no coach who can be there and do it for you. And when you're writing about things or thinking about things in the future, when you're in history class and like someone calls on you and you did not do the reading, like parley will prepare you because you will know how to come up with arguments on the spot, not because you read something, but because you can logic your way through it, things. And the people who I know who did parliamentary debate are some of the most interesting and thoughtful people in a way that I think PF people still are, obviously, and are fantastic at APTA, but it's a totally different way of thinking. And I think more people should at least just try it. It probably will make you better at PF to be able to think about things more critically, at least in some ways.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm a big fan of like this is something I really regret not doing in high school, but I'm a big fan of people like going into lots of different debate styles and learning anything they can from all of them. Like if I could go back to high school, there were a few weekends where I was like, well, my partner can't go to a tournament. I guess I just will not do anything. I should have just gone and like parley or gone to policy or gone in LD or like done something else that was crazy. Like hop on like an online BP tournament or something and try to learn. Because I think I'm starting to believe more and more that, like the true form of debate that is the best like arises out of all of the lessons you can learn from every debate style, you know. Um, but I don't know. I think that there is a lot of synergy between them, and people should try every different debate style. I'm currently coaching a lot of kids in Taiwan right now, and they're just figuring this out because the problem with Taiwan debate is that there are very few opportunities on the island to do PF tournaments. There's like the average kid I coach goes to like two tournaments in a year, just because there just aren't other ones that exist. And so I've been trying to get them more and more to go to World Schools tournaments because Taiwan has like a very rich like community of World Schools debaters, mostly from these like international schools. And that's scary because one, the kids like teach are like ESL students. They don't really speak very good English, and it's very scary for them not to have a script. And two, it's all international students. You know, it's like all the students who take all of their classes in English. but we've finally been motivating them to do world schools as well. And the kids who go and who are brave enough to try it, they come back and they're so much better at PF. Like they're actually so much better at PF. And I think that this is certainly true in the US as well. You should try to do like lots of different things and get out of your echo chamber of just the one event that you're in, which we'll talk about that as well, because I think that, oh my gosh, there's some weird assumptions in these different events that I want to dispel. Like, one thing I want you to help me with later is I've gotten some comments on my videos recently that are like, only evidence is legitimate, like it is impossible to construct an argument if you don't have a cut card for the argument. I'm like, this is nonsense. And so, yeah, I think that by doing other events, especially at high levels, not just doing them once and then leaving and saying, oh, that was stupid because I lost because my strategy didn't work, then you will learn more fully how to engage in your event. And especially, I think, how to exploit like the weaknesses of the other debaters in your event. Like, I think this was something that helped me in APDA, for example. By going from PF to APTA, I saw which PF things a lot of APTA debaters were worse at, and then I could exploit that to win more. But I think it goes the other way around as well. Like if I go back to PF from APTA, I see which APTA things the PFers are terrible at, and you can exploit that to just like farm wins as well, if that's what motivates you. So there's certainly strategic value in it as well. Okay, the next question I want to ask, unless you have anything to say about that, but I want to
Okay.
ask about your hottest debate takes in general. I don't know how much you've thought about this, but it seems like you think a lot about debate. So,
I do think a lot about debate, and I have quite a few. The thing is, like, I don't know how many of these are hot. I'll start with one that I think is very hot, and a lot of people will disagree with, but I think about sometimes and I think is true. I think examples are incredibly powerful. And everyone will say, don't play example Olympics. We can do this all day. This is stupid debate. I can throw an example at you too. And I know like examples are like all of debate. And I think like saying I have a piece of evidence, so it must be true is true. But examples with warrants are powerful. And I think the reason they're powerful is because they allow you, your opponents, and the judge to understand what you're saying and to like humanize it and rationalize it.
mhm.
Because if you just make a warrant that you kind of say don't really understand, the opponent's probably going to say non-unique, not that important, don't really respond to it. But if they can understand the argument through an example, it becomes a more important issue in the round that the judge then understands too, and they write down on their flow in a certain way. And I think that means that if you have an argument that's powerful and you want it to matter, putting a couple examples that are like, okay, yeah, like I actually get it. Like talking about like harmful, corrupt practices in countries where first world countries come in and like are abusive to third world workers is different than talking about the cobalt mine road that like leads in a specific example of something happening. And I think that matters, and I think it's real in debate, and I think people should think more critically about using examples to gut check. And you do it with parent judges. And you think that as debaters, you're better than that. You think you're smarter than the parent judge who only can grasp onto an example, but you're not because you just like everyone else believe in intuition pumps.
Yeah, I
That's
mean, I agree with that. Well, we can do them one by one. I have a lot. This is interesting. I agree completely. Examples matter. I'm trying to break down like why, like what are all the different ways that examples could matter? I found three. One is like an example functions as evidence. Like it's sort of like a proof that your mechanism is true, I guess. But I agree with you that that part seems kind of symmetrical. Like that creates these example Olympics. Like, okay, well, you have evidence for this, but none of us really have evidence, so I can like construct evidence for the opposite as well. We can throw counter examples and then they kind of just cancel out. And so then there's no reason to prefer your mechanism based on the example. That I completely agree with, but it seems like there's two other ways that we can treat examples or that they function technically. One is like as proof of concept, like or as like they root the mechanism in a tangible narrative that the judge can grasp, which is what you're describing. And this is not just true of parent judges. There's a third, though, that I think is interesting too. That's like, I think examples, more than anything else, force you to concisely explain every part of the argument. Like, you can't tell a story about how this happened in like cobalt mines in, I don't know, like some other country without going through every step of the argument of like how it works. And like it forces you to analogize from your warrants onto like an actual real world I don't know, like like scaffold that forces you to put all the warrants in place. and construct the full chain of logic using them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think examples need to be utilized more and not seen as only like fake debate if you don't have other ideas.
Yeah, 100%. This also implies, I guess, that it shouldn't just be examples that are real. Like you could use hypothetical
Yes,
examples.
totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
Yeah, I like that.
hypothetical are great. Okay, other hot takes. Hmm. Okay, I'll do this one. I doubt I'm the first person to say this. Like, I know for a fact I'm not the first person to say this, but I think people need to spend more time thinking and listening in debate. And I don't mean like necessarily have more round vision, but I think it's kind of like that, but more about how we're thinking about round vision. And I've noticed, especially in APDA, because it's easier to do this, but also in high school parley, I imagine in PF, people go into rounds and they do the exact same thing over and over again. They literally have pre-written PMRs or like some style of arguments, or you just hear a lot of MGs like just automatically having responses that they wrote in prep that are going to be written out and all that kind of stuff. LO is not adapting to the PMC. And I think that's why we're able to identify certain people's weaknesses, what they are, and why we're able to exploit them because they're like so obvious because you do the exact same thing every single time. And I think it's a bad thing. And I think it would be better though if people just listened more. And I think there's like a couple reasons for this. The first is just people lose rounds because of it. And this is so simple. And it's something that I think a lot of people forget. You were so busy writing your PMR, or you were so busy writing that response in MG that you missed a line that they said that was actually the most important argument in the entire round. And then it gets pulled through in MO and then talked about in LOR, and then PMR just drops it. And then you lose. And you should lose because you didn't listen. And I don't think this is because you have bad round vision. I think it's because you legitimately weren't listening. And people are so scared that, like, like if I don't have a prepped out PMR, I'm not going to know what to say. But it is better to not know what to say, I think, than to not say the most important thing in the round. Because if you're good enough to be in that round where you could miss a single line, then you are also good enough to respond to that argument. And I think people need to trust themselves more. But I think there's also like a more like strategic level of this beyond just like missing something, because I think that's like something that everyone goes through, but not the most important thing. I think rounds often don't turn out the way we expect them to. And this is a problem with APTA. The way it is structured, where you have a PMC where you're supposed to think about how every argument goes out, you have this expectation for how rounds are going to go. And often that's just not how the round goes. And I think it's not good to just give the PMR you were expecting to give or all of those things. And the best thing for a PM to do, in my opinion, write down what your MG says, what's important, what you think is valuable. Listen to the MO and LOR and think about what they say that's most problematic for you. And then you construct your PMRs around those things and include any good PMC stuff. But the round isn't about the PMC, it's using the PMC to have aid what happened later on. And if you do that, then you don't have those judges being like, I wish you would just answer this question in PMR because I have two competing ideas of what the round looks like. Versus if you weigh explicitly against those MO things, not saying the round has to be defensive, but there's no intervention, especially in a like a debate format where everyone's like, I don't want to intervene. Then don't make them intervene. Tell you exactly how you're beating their arguments. And this is also just true. I'm rambling, but golden turns are your best friends, I think, in PMR. Like having an argument that's new in MO that is really good, that you can turn for the first time, is the cleanest thing for judges to vote on, and they want to vote on them. So, like, those are also very powerful for you, and it's also just better debate and probably makes you happier if you're able to come up with cool things than like knowing what the round's going to be after. And I think it regains people's love for debate.
Damn. Two asides and then I'll engage. One, I'm really getting like APTA flashbacks. I feel like the way that you speak is so APTA. Like, I don't know if that makes any sense. Like, it felt like you were giving like a full parley speech right there.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I wanted to say I appreciate that. It's good memories. Two, um, it's interesting to me how every different debate format develops their own jargon. Like, I don't know if I misheard you. Did you say golden turns? Is that
Oh
like
yeah, I don't know if that's like an that might be a yeah, I did.
is that like a new turn in the PMR against the
A
MO?
new turn in the PMR because it can't be responded to, so it's
Oh,
golden.
that's so interesting. See, I don't know. Like I
That
have
is West Coast parley jargon. It's not even from here.
whoa. Man, you're really taken from I'm such a nerd about this stuff. So obviously like I think there are mixed things to say about jargon and debate in general. Like it is often used exclusively. It's often like I don't know. We use it excessively for sure. We like create jargon where there's no need for jargon there. But I also think it's really interesting just like from like a sociological perspective of looking at how all these different debate formats create different concepts for oftentimes ideas that are kind of overlapping with concepts in other debate formats. But I have like a document. I literally have a notes doc right now that I'm building that is just every like piece of jargon I've ever heard from any debate format. I gotta add this one though. So golden turns, interesting.
Return. Okay,
Uh,
new.
that's crazy. I did a practice round. Oh man, I don't know if you know these people. I did a practice round with Andrew Monteith, and I guess he was you know Andrew and William Logue. I don't know if he's still on the circuit from Williams.
I judged on a panel with him.
Yo,
And he
that's
judged
crazy.
me, actually.
Damn. Hopefully he gave you the dub. But I did a practice round with them because I wanted to prove that I guess golden turns are unfair. Um,
Oh, they're totally unfair.
the practice round was like I wrote a case that was like this and this and this and this and this are preferable to none of them. Like if we do these eight policies, it would be better than doing zero of the eight policies. And then I just like I think the point of it was I had zero offense in the PMC or the MG. And then I just baited as many MO arguments as I could, and then I only went for golden turns in the PMR. And I told them I would do this before the round. So I was like, the point of it is to like demonstrate that like this is an impossible strategy to beat because it's always possible to generate them if you're just creative enough and like you're creative in what you call turn because people don't really have a stable concept of what like counts as a turn or what doesn't. And I have that recording somewhere on my computer. Maybe I should put it somewhere. But yeah, that was a wow, blast from the past. I think golden turns are unfair. That's the new take.
They
Um,
probably are, but they're also a winning
yeah,
strategy.
it's true. But Gov doesn't need more unfair winning strategies than it already
True.
has.
That's
Um,
true.
the stuff you were actually saying, I completely agree. Um, with like you need to listen. I think sometimes people should like take notes less on what the other team is saying in favor of listening more. Like I remember before my time, the debaters of old in APDA, they gave me advice that was like sometimes you should just sit back in your chair and just listen, like it's a normal conversation, which is crazy advice. Like I was like, "What, you boomer? That's crazy. I need to like track and take notes and have a good flow." The whole point of like, what's the point of listening if I can't remember like what the arguments are later in the round because I don't have them written down anywhere. But I think it's actually such a good piece of advice because when you do that, when you just sit back and listen, like everything becomes clear. It's like a whole different perspective on debate. And it's much easier to see the big picture, even if you lose some of the details, I think.
I
So I
agree.
agree.
I
Uh,
think that writing, though, is important. I know people will disagree, but I think that's like the benefit of computers and a partner. And like that's why you can listen and they can flow and you can look at the flow or like have them bold things. But I know that's a lot of people are really tied to the paper flow, and I get
yeah.
it. I
This,
get flowing yourself. But if your listening is valuable and a partner can help with that.
yeah, definitely controversial. I was like a paper flow truist, or like, I don't know what. I was a purist, a paper flow purist for a very long time. And then I started flowing only on, like, literally on Notes app, because I didn't bring paper to one tournament. And I was like, this works. It works. But I don't know why. I would never flow with a partner. Um, I guess it's just a pet peeve, but I've heard like people say it over and over again that it works. It's like really efficient. So
I think, but I get that. I get why people disagree.
yeah, maybe it's one of those things where like if I'd tried it once, I would have been hooked, but who knows? Any other debate hot takes?
Okay, I guess I've maybe one more that I think is good. So, um, I was thinking about like how I think about debate as a whole. And I think a lot of people have like this question is like debate about truth or is debate about like fake game. And I think debate, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, is a game of truth finding, but not like truth finding of logic finding. And the way I'll put this is like we're not trying to come up with what's the true answer. But if we use like fundamentals and like basic ideas and concepts about the way that we live, or first principles even, and like a couple other things that we decide to be true. From there, who can come to the most logically true thing, regardless of if it actually holds true anywhere else in the world. And I think if we think about that, a game of like who can make the most logically coherent ways, it helps you see debate in a better way because it's neither about what is true or what isn't true, but what will be the most logically coherent and specifically to your audience because like every format, whether or not we like think about it this way, has a lot of biases, like whether those are political or cultural or whatever those are, within that ecosystem, what are the most true things, I think is like actually how we end up at the correct decision. So thinking about it that way in terms of like where are the holes in logic, but not in fact, can
Yeah,
sometimes guide where we are in like a round.
that's actually like a perfect transition because I want to start talking about like how debate as a game functions. Um, so okay, I love this take. I guess I'm trying to reformulate it in my head because I think that there's we can like use it as a launch pad to get into other questions. So what you're saying is we debate is not about seeking the actual truth, like the fact of the matter. It's about seeking the most coherent logical system. And the logical system is sort of more of a closed system, which allows us to do this. Like it's like the problem with truth seeking is like it's impossible to know everything about the world, right? Like
Yeah.
even in an evidence format, if we have cards, like that's not like that's a very poor, maybe we are one step closer out of an infinite set of steps toward this like truth that's out there. But yeah, it seems kind of impossible to find like the truth of the world. Because it's more of like an open system, like it's impossible to guarantee anything with certainty unless you define that thing to be true. And that's why like math is possible, right? Like we know 1 plus 1 is 2 because we define 1 plus 1 to be 2. That's like within the logical system of math, that's a true statement. Um, and so I like this as a way to avoid some of the problems with truth seeking and perhaps some of the intervention around it. Um, I guess I we could push it a little bit further. You were talking about like first principles. I think maybe the reason that this works from first principles is because first principles are things that are assumed by everyone in the round. Like all four of the debaters, let's say, all agree that first principles. If we disagree on this, then we get to a really
Oh
funky
yeah.
situation. Like we could disagree about everything, and then it would be impossible to have debate, I guess, at that point. And we'd just be saying no like the whole time. And so we have to agree about something. And I guess first principles is a substitute for one thing that we probably commonly agree on. But I think that we can extend it from first principles as well. Like in different rounds, there are more other shared assumptions, like so many more other shared assumptions. I think that debate is about using shared assumptions, like things that we agree on, to create a like a closed logical system within which we can prove that our side is right.
Yeah. I
I
think
don't know, but
that's like no wait, I actually think that is entirely accurate. Like I think even if we think about debate rounds as a whole, you don't, people who like think they win rounds, I don't think they walk out and think that our arguments are true. Or are you, you're not even asking your partner or like the people around you, do you think we were like correct? No, it's like a question of were we the most logically sound? And I think it's implicitly how we think about debate, even if it's not how we explicitly think about debate. And even when we think if we're convincing our judges, with like some exceptions to like certain staunchly like very truthy judges, like you're not thinking about was I correct actually, but did I use the things that are logically correct to make them think that I was truthful?
yeah, that makes sense. So then, okay, let's get into these questions then. The next question that stems from this is, what is your paradigm? Like, how do you judge a round and determine the winner?
Okay, so I've thought about this a lot throughout high school because I think it's incredibly controversial. And what I've noticed is as I've gotten older and as people get older, they become much more truth over tech. I think that's very interesting. I have a lot of thoughts on that. But where I start and what I've believed for a very long time is I think when people say that they're tabula rasa, it's like kind of naive and silly because we're not blank slates. We have biases and realities and things that make us who we are. But I think what I try and do when I get into a round is I be as much of a blank slate as humanly possible and have as few preconceived biases as possible. What I think is true is if you're going to give like a more like a more complicated, weird, not like intuitive argument, you have to warrant it more for me to buy the impact versus if it's an argument I'm going to like read in the news on an average day or something I'm going to hear in a friend group setting, I'm more likely to buy that warrant implicitly. Like, don't like if we live on telling me we live on Mars, I'll believe it in a round if you can warrant it really well. But I won't necessarily like credit it instantly if you say it. And then when it comes to dropped arguments, I will credit a dropped argument as true. I will probably weigh the impact less unless you weigh it for me, but then I don't really understand why you don't impact it in the beginning of the round or explain why it's true. But I default to like better weighing and better warranting and strength of like if possible. But I think that's like generally my paradigmatic beliefs.
Okay. This might be futile, but I'm interested in breaking this down into like logical steps. For like what are the minimum requirements for someone to win an argument in front of you? Um,
Okay.
so you said obviously no one is tabula rasa. I tend to agree. But you also said that there's like sort of we can have some shared assumptions that we can create like a sort of closed or we can approximate a closed logical system, and then whoever's more logically sound under that logical system. That seems like something that could be more tabula rasa, right? Like if the assumptions are shared by the debaters, you don't have to do anything to like they Hmm. I think if someone agrees with the other side on something, then a tabula rasa judge should also agree, right?
Yes.
Like, and so this avoids some of the problems with tabula rasa. Like, you can be a blank slate that is filled in by agreements.
I
And then,
think the only problem is if then they disagree on something you
yeah.
would consider basic, then you no longer like just agree with it as an assumption.
Mhm.
Which, yeah,
Mhm.
the tabula rasa thing is like mind
Yeah,
weird.
it's
Like,
weird. It is weird. Hmm. So my question is, I guess, yeah, what are the minimum requirements for you to count something as an argument to begin with? Like, what makes an argument sufficient instead of just like words or an argument that has not like met its burdens in BP language or it doesn't have a word in PF language or whatever you want to say?
it's a good question. So, like, generally, I will try my absolute best not to decide what an argument is on my own, but
Mm.
let the debaters in the round tell me what an argument is. If something is not collapsed on at the end of the round, then I don't care if it was or wasn't an argument in the context of the round, except if you ask me for feedback, then I'll give you my opinions on how an argument could have been better in terms of what I think good debate is. But my opinion on good debate doesn't impact how I judge typically. I mean, it probably does in some way, but not that I can like
Sure.
really understand. And then, so it's their job then to tell me what an argument is. So I'll look obviously first to the weighing. And at that point, it's like, who says an argument's more important? Okay, I buy that one side is weighing higher. Then I go back and decide if that was ever given as an argument with warrants and if those warrants stand or if those warrants are refuted. And any argument that is on the flow, as labeled as an argument by one team and engaged with as an argument by the other team, is an argument for me. Um, and I
Interesting.
think that's how I'll generally judge. Like I'll let them do as much work as humanly possible. Because I think like if I believed debate was more of a game of truth and finding the reality, I'd be more inclined to think, but this doesn't really prove what you're trying to say in the first place. But I don't really think that's what it is. At the end of the day, I think it's like the ideal format of debate is whoever's most logically sound. But I have also thoughts on this in like terms of the rules of debate and how that works. But I
Oh,
generally
we're gonna
think
get
like
into
they
all of
have,
this, I promise.
yeah.
So, okay, this is really interesting what you're saying. So, one requirement is it needs to be collapsed on, like it needs to be in your final speech or whatever.
Yeah.
If it's not, then you won't.
Or
Totally
or like sticky in the MO, depending on the rules of the format, whatever
sure,
it
sure,
is.
sure. Yeah, I think we can largely agree on that. The second one is like it has to be, you consider the weighing first. I also agree on that. The interesting part is about you will look at any argument that is like treated as an argument by both teams, right? And then that is called an argument. So this is interesting because this is one of those like shared agreements, right? That like implicitly both sides are agreeing through their treatment of the argument that it is in fact an argument, like a complete.
Well, I think also a lack of disagreement is also agreement that it's an argument. So like
Okay.
if a team
Okay.
like this is an argument, and then they extend it as this is an argument, and then like unless it's new called or unless someone responds to it at some point, then you're like implicitly agreeing with the other side when they tell you that it's something that's important in argument. It can be collapsed upon.
What if it's not an argument? Like, okay, hear me out. What if they treat it as an argument, the other team misses it, but the argument is like it is just nonsense. It's like it's a random sentence. It's like an idiom that they found on Google. It has nothing to do with the topic, and then they say this is an independent reason to vote Gov. And the
Goblin.
other like
Um,
yeah, what do you do?
I said it's like goblin in that case. Um,
We can talk about
but
that one later. I feel like there's a little bit of difference.
okay. I think that I would, so I've never had this experience in the round, and I think that's because I don't think anyone's ever had an experience in a round where there's an idiom and then like vote idiom. Because I would really be hard pressed to find a world in which that can be weighed or explained why there's an impact and why that impact matters. So you have, as I said, like you have to go back into the flow to show that they prove that they actually reach their impact and get to that impact, and that the impact outweighs the other team's weighing.
Right. Okay.
So like it's not possible unless there is some of that on the flow earlier for it to matter enough for you to outweigh it. And then at that point, like if it's like being weighed in the last speech, like I would expect a new call for the first
Sure,
time.
sure. So, okay, question then. What is an impact? And why is that different from anything else?
I mean, I think these are like, okay. Um, I think I could give an answer that is like probably like you're taught it in debate. It's something that like has to be uh, the way I understand an impact, like truly, is like something that I can like humanly understand as something that I care about, like in some way, shape, or form. And like that can be something as like abstract as, I don't know, sexism. Or I guess that's not abstract, but like something as abstract as like value of life, um, or something as real as starvation. And I think like all of these things to me are intuitively impacts. But I think that's also just like true of debate. And that's like my real answer as like it's not something you have to be able to like put into words as to what it is. But when you see it, you know it. And you know that that is an impact. You know
Yeah.
that that's something that matters. You know that something is a warrant when it's proving an argument to be true.
I'm suspicious of this actually, because okay, earlier you told me that you will treat something as an argument if it is treated by as an argument by both sides. And you told me that that treatment, that agreement can also come in the form of a lack of disagreement. So what happens if the Gov team treats something in the idiom as an impact? Like why is your threshold for what is defined as impact different from the threshold of what is defined as argument? Because
I mean, so like argument versus they treat one part of it as an impact. I mean, eh, like truth be told, like if I thought that like there was at this point at which they're collapsing on an idiom, like if we're really going into this example, that's the thing that they're doing, and like this is where I'm expected to vote. For me to have voted on that, and there's no other weighing that they're doing in this round, right? The op is probably doing, or gov, whoever on the other side is probably doing some weighing of their own. At that point, I have to intervene and decide which weighing is better because no one's like engaging with the other. So unless they're doing absolutely nothing on the other side, like I feel like this idiom, since I don't understand, I don't understand how you end up voting on things without engaging with others. And when you let me intervene because you're not engaging with anyone else, I won't. But if like
okay,
you're like, I think that's the question. I mean, I think this type of debate is like one where anyone would struggle to judge it. Like, I
yeah,
mean, no matter what, like when teams refuse to engage with one another, make really ridiculous, absurd arguments, which everyone has judged at some point in their like judging career, and it's like a miserable experience. Like, you just don't know. Like, you just vote somewhere because you
yeah.
have to.
But I think it's these, hey, we were talking about the value of examples earlier, even hypotheticals. I think it's these crazy examples that are hardest to judge that tell us the most about how our logical system of debate actually functions. So in that principle, I'll push it one step more extreme. What if both sides are only making idioms? And
Yeah.
the arguments they have with each other are my idiom is more wise than your idiom. And the topic was about arms sales or something. Like none of the idioms are related to arms sales. We're just like no one has even mentioned this. You think you're going crazy. This is like what is happening here? But every argument in the round is premised on the same basic assumption, an unstated assumption that the wisdom of the idiom is the most important voting issue. What do you
Um,
do?
like my like honest answer, I'd vote op because Gov just improved their burden. Like I don't have like a
But
better. There's no arguments in the round, but I guess that's not the question you're asking. Like you want me to actually evaluate like on the
no, no, no,
merits.
no. That's I think that's an answer. Like I want your vote in the round. That's an interesting answer though. So you think the Gov has a burden to prove that the case statement is true, right? I agree with
Yes,
that.
unless they argue that they don't. Like that is like the rule I operate
Okay.
under.
But
I
is
think I will here's another thing I'll say. I'll operate within the rule book of like how debate operates unless told like specifically otherwise.
mhm.
Because
So
I think that's like
that's
why theory in Prague exists, I guess.
right. This is really interesting because now I think we have a distinction between being told explicitly and being told implicitly. Like to me, the fact that everyone is treating these as legitimate arguments that do help Gov win, if true, implicitly means that all debaters in the round are agreeing that they meet the burden of the Gov, if true.
Interesting. I mean, is it like there's no argumentation about what the burden is? Like, I think you'd have to tell me that our burden is no longer this, but to prove that like idiom wise over idiom not wise. Because like I could just like if a gov team just got up there and like gave speech about like something that was important to them, and like op then is like, okay, let's all give speech. Like, I still think you vote op unless they tell you you should vote. The role of you, the burden in this round gives more compelling speech, like about life or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I'm
I think that's how like Prague exists. Like to
yeah,
say
yeah,
the
yeah,
role of
yeah.
the ballot is different in this round. But if you don't give a different role of the ballot, then you lose the argument, is like the
Right.
idea.
But when does the role of the ballot need to be explicit versus implicit if it's agreed upon?
I mean, it's a good question. Like, I think the problem is as a judge in that round, even if everyone's like making, like, I think if you apply this argument to if everyone spends time on like a stupid argument in a round, but like the rest of the debate is still happening, but like it's like a minute of the debate, you still probably vote on like the real debate, even if there's like this stupid 20-minute of the round wash at the end of the round, which is like a definitions debate, honestly. Like this happens
Yeah,
all the time. You
yeah.
vote on the actual content because that's the role of the ballot, even if it's like implicitly agreed upon that everyone cares more about this silly little argument.
But I feel like there's something else there that we can use to explain that. Like, even though implicitly it's true that everyone cares about this other argument, I don't know that we can say because they spend quantitatively more time, they care more. If they're, for example, if they're saying that they care about the other arguments and they weigh the other arguments, like probably in that case, I mean, I think there's two ways to treat this. One is by saying, um, maybe we do agree that you implicitly care more about this other clash, but the impact of this clash is greater. And I haven't been told that either of those things are important. Like, no debater has told me impact matters more than time, or time matters more than impact. And so it's up to me as a judge to decide that. And I think the impact intuitively matters more than the time you spend on the argument for how I treat it as a judge. And therefore, I think that this clash is greater than that clash, is one way you can
Yeah.
do it. But this is not the case in my example, right? Like it's
Or it's the
100%.
only thing that exists in the round.
Yeah.
I guess the other way to like explain why, even if you don't like vote on presumption, which I mean, I probably would. Like in real circumstance, like when I think if like nothing is proved, I'm not told that something else needs to be proved, like it's not even a debate round. Like I would, but in like another way you can even justify voting, I think just purely for the op, is like to say that if clashes wash out as judges, we try not to intervene. And like we won't vote on a clash for like I literally have no actual way to evaluate this clash. And then at that point, you
Yeah.
just vote. I think like in that case you vote probably off. Because
Right.
like, I don't think it like I think you could literally flip a coin. Like and I think there are judges who will say they will do that. Like if they
Yeah.
cannot find a real way to judge a round.
That makes sense to me, but it seems like in this case, I've given you an example where they do have a way of evaluating the clash.
Of judging if it's wise.
Yeah. And like to be clear, these are good debaters, right? They're making like arguments about which things that make up wisdom are more important. Like they're doing weighing between like
If they're telling me that the most important thing to vote on this round is whoever is the most wise, and they say this explicitly, vote on wisdom, I'd probably vote on wisdom, whoever I like actually walked out of the room and said was
but now we're
wise.
back to the original question. Why do they have to say it? Why do they have to say the words vote on
Because
wisdom?
I don't think it is implicit unless they say it explicitly. Because I think debate operates under a set of rules. To change the rules, you have to explain why the rules should be different. Or like tell me that the rules should be different.
I guess I'm not convinced that this is a change in the rules. If you say that like we're treating these arguments as legitimate arguments by agreement between the debaters in the round, like why is it that these arguments don't like I feel like the the reasons you have to
Are they
give.
not real arguments? I think that you could decide. I think a judge who voted like either way in the round would not be wrong. And for what it's worth, like I think that's what makes debate like debate. Like I think that a lot of uh, there's a lot of like at the intricacies of in really high level rounds. I think that's why you get splits at Nats. Why like these great judges and these great rounds are judging, and it's like so controversial. Because it gets really hard to judge certain
Yeah.
things. I think you'd be valid if you judged the other way. I think for me, like my intuition is literally don't do anything unless they tell you to. And they didn't say it. And it's why like people won't make up implicit arguments that connect A to B for you. Even if it's basically there, but you didn't say it, so you won't vote on it.
Right. Interesting. Hmm. So then I have another question going back to a real scenario. Um, you presumably think that like arguments require warrants. Um,
Yes. I mean, I
and
think good arguments require warrants.
wait, what? Will you vote for a bad argument that doesn't have a warrant? Like,
I mean, in like a horrible round, if the other team doesn't have warrants either, I don't know.
oh, that's interesting.
I think like the caliber of rounds in high school parley that I have judged
Yeah.
have been like some of the worst. If you have no evidence, nothing written for you, and you're debating your first round ever, like the bar is not high.
Well, this is interesting because how is this different from the idioms situation? Like, if neither side has any warrants for why their arguments are true, um, I feel like we have
Maybe they have some warrants. Maybe they have like a semblance of warrants.
okay. So you need a semblance of warrant to have an argument.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I guess that maybe makes sense. What is the difference between a semblance of warrant and no warrant?
Phew. I think like I think a semblance of a warrant and no warrant is saying something is true and then maybe like saying like half of an example or like giving like one line of intuition pump. That's like missing a lot of things, but like you get where they're kind of getting at versus just the assertion.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like the sky is blue. I saw it when I walked outside yesterday is a better argument than the sky is blue. Although they're both probably like that's what I'm saying with like things that we conceive to be true. Like, yeah, sky is blue is argument because we've like decided to some extent in the round it's blue unless someone tells us it's not.
Interesting. This is all really interesting to me. Would you vote on like sky is not blue?
I don't know. Like it would take a lot, but like I it would take a lot and it would need to be like an absolute fumble. I think this comes down to like my basic assumption in debate, which I was told a very long time ago, I think is very true, which is like most debaters don't win rounds. Their opponents just lose them.
Hmm,
Um
right.
I I think at high levels it's not true, but I think in most debate you'll do for most of your career ever, it is true. It's like who can mess up less, who can stay on the flow or way more or just make fewer mistakes. And I think that's like why I can say all of these things about like I think it's usually easy to judge rounds. I think it's usually easy to judge rounds because usually someone just has such a
Yeah.
mess up that is so different than the other team that it's like pretty clean. And then there's some rounds where it's impossible to judge because no one's actually messing up and then you actually have to evaluate the arguments. And that's like the struggle I think that most judges do face.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to move on to a different subject now. Thank you for putting up with all my sufficiency questions. I feel like the answer to all of these is like it just depends on how you treat them. But I feel like every time I ask people these, I learn something new about people's basic intuitions about debate. So thank you. Um, okay, next, I think from something you said earlier, it seems like there's three ways someone can win in front of you. One is if you win weighing and you win your argument, you win. Two is if there's no weighing, but the other side has no argument and you do, then you win. Which is, I guess, sort of implicitly the same thing. It's just like you win weighing, you win a hypothetical weighing that wasn't said against an argument that doesn't exist because well, I guess really it's the same thing as the third thing, which is if both arguments are true and neither team has weighing, then you will do the weighing for them based on whatever you think is least interventionist.
Yeah,
Um, and that kind of encapsulates the second one. Like if they have no argument, then that you're doing the same thing. You're like doing
you
weighing
are.
that wasn't there. Right. Okay, so it's all weighing just based on if it was explicit or if it wasn't said, then you'll do it. You'll fill it in for them. Okay, this makes sense. Um, hmm. The next question I want to ask you is maybe we can talk about evidence in debate because this has been very controversial on my channel recently. Now, obviously, you've never done well, I don't know how West Coast Parley works. You have cards, do
There's
you?
evidence. There's not cards, but
Okay.
you can spend 20 minutes on the internet. Wait, this is great. Um, but you're not allowed to cite them. You're just
What?
allowed to sit in the
Okay,
round.
how does that work?
Wait, I actually don't know. It was like this rule that they came up with, but that was unless it has changed since the last year, that was the rule. You can have evidence without the citation.
I'm very curious about that. Do you read the evidence quote or do you just reference it?
You can read the quote, but no citation.
Wait, like
I actually think this would be great in PF, like in a weird way. Like not actually great. Like you should like mail a list of citations to give like intellectual property rights, but like if your statistics were just as good as any other assertion without the warrant, that would probably be good.
I agree with that. We should unpack that actually. But first, how does this work in the first place? Like, okay, does this mean, okay, presumably, can you call for cards in West Coast Parlay?
No,
Then what
you
if you
can't.
just lie?
You can. So they made the rule. I think the rule was made because East Coast people wanted to keep West Coasters from actually getting the benefits of having evidence. So they then were like, okay, you can have your evidence, but you can't have any validity to
That's
it.
so weird. So you can
Like
kind
you
of
can have
say,
Ks, but you can't have your back files. So
right.
like that was like what the rules were. So they were very much like interesting.
So what's the point of reading a card?
There isn't one.
Do people do this? Like, why?
Yeah. Okay. So the other thing is like judges have opinions and really like entrenched judges have really strong opinions. So like if you think that evidence is really important, then maybe you'll just pick it up as an argument, even if it's not what the rules are. Like, and that's bad. Like that's why this is like probably a little dysfunctional, the East and West Coast like
Yeah.
situation. But it's like technically the rule. People don't really break it. Or like if you're on a West Coast round, that's when you'll use evidence because you both like it. Where East Coast you won't. Like it's weird stuff like that. It's not really a functional strategy. It's just like people believe your evidence to be true unless someone says your evidence isn't true in a round. Just like people believe assertions to be true unless you say assertion isn't true.
So I guess why is the strategy not just to say all of their evidence is wrong?
I mean, I people do. Like this evidence isn't true. But like also like it's kind of uncomfortable, right? Because if like I kid you not, there was this round at TOC when I was in high school, and I lost this round. It's very unfortunate to me. And like the people I was debating, it was somehow MLK had been brought into the round. And I like explain like at some point how MLK got shot on a hotel ba balcony. And they're like, no, he didn't actually. And they just kept saying it so many times in the round that I was like, okay, like I must be wrong. Like they must be so much more right. And they just kept saying it. And the judges ended up believing that they were right. They were right. Like they were wrong like at the end of the round. But it just I think that's how it ends up happening. And it's like kind of becomes uncomfortable, like weird dynamics. And like people kind of just give up on the evidence.
Yeah, then what's the point of having the evidence? That's weird.
There probably, in my opinion, there isn't much of one.
I need to get a West Coast parley debater on here next and pick their brain. That's interesting. But okay, I guess maybe this will color some of your beliefs about the next controversy. But so for context, most of my viewer base are PFers, and most of those PFers nowadays want to be policy debaters, basically. And in all of this is wrapped up this kind of philosophy that cards are more important than anything else. I don't know how much you know about PF or the current state of PF, but nowadays every single case, like every argument they read, is just cards. There's no other, it's like they'll put like a little summary in their own words at the top, and then they'll read a quote. And then it's a summary and then a quote. But there's nothing else in between for like the first two speeches at least. Um,
Okay.
I think this is quite unstrategic, in my opinion. But I want to know what you think about this. Like, if
I
you,
mean,
yeah,
yeah. The first thing that jumps out to me, and like probably not what people want to hear, and they definitely disagree with me, that sounds so not fun. Like, so not fun. Like, maybe you're cutting your own cards, but even if you're cutting your own cards, this sounds like you're doing something you would do for an English class. Like, this doesn't sound like an entertaining thing to me. But like, clearly people find this fun to recite things that maybe think about how much more fun it would be if you also came up with a creative warrant that you got to show off that other people weren't doing. But maybe like fun's not the point in strategy. And I mean, this sounds like just intuitively, definitely not the most strategic thing. And I don't do PF, and I'm sure the comments will come as to why I'm wrong. Um, but evidence, like at the end of the day, and what I discovered in my brief time doing my evidence format, you can find statistics or facts for anything, anywhere on the internet. It's like, and even if you can't find the stat, you can find something that basically gives you the stat and like tells you that like you can format into saying like something about the statistic or the card is true. And I think the problem with that is if you both have the same level of ability to make things up and say things are true, then at the end of the day, you're leaving so much to that judge sitting in the corner to decide who they like better. So much to your ability to speed read, so much your ability to find which card to run and where to put it, and if you have better prep and better cards than your opponents in that circumstance. And like if you put in logic and warrants, like at absolute minimum, I have to imagine the parent judges judging you like that more and pick that up more because they don't like your cards being spread at them. Because I know parents aren't different between Parley and PF, and I know they didn't like the faster and more evidence we would read at them. So I think like you're definitely picking up that, and that's a large portion of your pool, I imagine. And you're also probably just picking up people when, since everyone wants to be so non-interventionist, if you're doing something that is different on a different playing field and explaining, even if the evidence isn't true, you don't necessarily have to pick, but our logic is more advanced and more practical.
yeah, that makes sense. I feel like you're right. People are going to complain in the comment section of this video. So there's two things I want to do maybe. One is I want to investigate some of the comments I've already gotten. Because maybe we can preempt some of the things that will come. And two is maybe I should give the case for evidence in PF. So it's not just like two people going back and forth about how evidence is stupid. So
That's
number
good.
one, one of the complaints that I've gotten from comments recently is someone said they've done a little bit of both. Like they've done a little bit of world schools and they've done mostly PF. And they said that In all non-evidence formats, there is a requirement for style to be incorporated into judging. What do you say about that?
I think it's true of world schools. I did a tournament once and I felt very similarly. American Parley could not be more different. Like, you are supposed to be able, like, hypothetically, it's not really true, but like parent judges across the board, I know it's true in PF will also be like, ah, they sounded better and looked more professional, so I vote for them. Like, this is just something that happens. But like 90% of your judges, you're supposed to be able to like speak through a robotic sound. It doesn't matter what you sound like, how you speak, how you put it together. Like the arguments are really just treated as arguments in American Parley. It's very technical in the way that APDA is technical, if any people know about that. But no, I don't think that's been my experience at all.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, wait, I'm gonna pull up this comment real quick so that maybe I can dig into it. Because the other thing that they said, I think they said that evidence seems like a necessary facet of technical debate. Why do you think evidence is not necessary to construct arguments about material topics? Um,
Um,
yeah,
Okay. So I think it's like a hard to answer question about like the format of PF because we've decided what PF was, and then like we decided that PF was necessary to like seek truth because we told ourselves that debate was to seek truth and to like create the best arguments. But if we like say debate isn't necessarily to seek truth or construct the best arguments, then that is no longer true because in our real lives, there's never a time where you're going up to your parents and reading a card and saying, "This is why you must get me an iPhone right now." Because like that's not applicable to how we live our lives. So, like if we're looking on like a playing field as to what's like the actual best, what's actually going to get us the most far, what's actually going to like give us the most material good argumentation, then cards not the answer. Evidence, not necessarily the answer. And maybe a statistic here and there answer, but not without saying the logic or why something makes sense or without piecing it together and making sense as to why something is true. And in a format of debate, this is like too, because you're convincing. In the same way you're convincing in life, you're convincing in a round, and you're convincing in a different way with different rules. But like at the end of the day, it's convincing. And if you don't think you can convince someone with like 7 cards without any logic in between, you probably like can't do that in a round either, even if you can have more cards because the rules allow for it.
that makes sense. Last thing that I've gotten in comments is I get this a lot. Like I feel like this is very common is people say, but we're just a bunch of idiot high schoolers and we don't know anything about the world. And so how can you trust us over like don't we need evidence from actual professionals if we're talking about real world topics? Like the most recent PF topic was about nuclear energy. Like how do you expect high schoolers to have a informed discussion about nuclear energy without having their arguments grounded in evidence?
Well, first, you should probably read it anyways. It's really good to learn about the world. Like, don't call yourself an idiot high schooler. Like, you should do a lot of prep and you should learn about the world. And, like, that is your responsibility. And the parley debaters will tell you they spend a lot of time reading and not just reading about one thing, but reading about so many things. And when I was like a sophomore in high school or a junior in high school, I could like get into real deep debates with my history teacher on like historical events because I knew them for debate. And I think that's something that you get when you learn about the world. But I also just think it's not necessarily true and like life and something we should all think about. And I'm sure like older people in your families would tell you that like experts are the only people who know. And like the people who are like doing all of the research are the only people who can speak about this or understand something. Because like we all have lives, we all have experiences, we all have intuitions. Like democracy functions with a lot of people who don't know a whole lot about everything, like giving their opinion and voting. And you can be more educated, more informed people who do that because like debate isn't about expert versus expert. Otherwise, bring experts in and let them talk and you can take notes and listen. It's about like you trying to have that conversation and learn it for yourself and learn from the people who think on a very similar level to you. And I also like think that's probably what like you're doing debate for. What if you're doing it for college, it's probably what colleges are looking for to see how you can think about debate, not necessarily how like the smarter people who already went through college can think about debate. And I think that's like an important thing to think about too.
That makes sense. Okay, now I'll steelman the case for evidence
Okay.
in debate. I think there's 4 points I've come up with. as you've been talking. Number one is there seems to be the same problem that West Coast Parley has in any debate event where we don't have a lot of evidence. The problem is that you say things that are unverifiable and they can be counter-asserted against. Logic, the problem I think extends down to logic as well, because even if you have warrants, even if you have like reasoning for why something is probably a cause of another thing, those reasons themselves ultimately are also just asserted because like there's this problem where every reason is also an assertion that needs a reason, and then that reason is also an assertion that needs a reason, and so on and so forth. So technically, it is possible for the other team to counter assert against everything that you say, in which case, without evidence, it is completely unverifiable. This is most obvious in very material topics, like if we talk about something that clearly requires scientific evidence or like economics, for example. Like part of this just seems to be like require a degree of evidence to know what is true. What say you?
Okay. I mean, I guess the first question is like, can't you just like counter assert card against card and say like, no, my card true, no, my card true? And like a lot of that like probably boils down to some extent to the same thing. I'm sure there are people who will say like, no, there are like some level of evidentiary things that are true. I think this is also true of logic, like whether or not we like see it that way. Like in the same way that I can tell you there are things that would be really hard for you to prove to me. Like it would be really hard for you to prove that, like, I don't know, Vladimir Putin, like, was just friends, like Zelensky and Vladimir Putin were like on the phone call having like on the phone having like friendly conversations all the time because that's not an intuitive thing. And you could probably find a card that says actually they like each other a lot, but here's the 10 reasons they don't. But like you know which card is better. And you also know which logic chain is better to some extent. I like have to imagine at the end of the day. But I think like the other thing is there can be one different topics which don't necessarily always require the same level of evidence. And second, maybe the evidence part of the debate is not the debate you're meant to have because there's like multiple layers. Like when we talk about legalize all drugs, I've seen like the PF cases, and it's also in a bunch of APTA cases, and they're different because you're having like different conversations about the number of lives lost versus like the actual impact of lives and like the quality of lives. And these are two different debates and like concepts of what debate happens. Both are maybe important, but like it doesn't mean one is less valid than the other and they can't coexist.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is shift like the goal of our conversation here to something different. Right now, I think you've made a very compelling case for why multiple different styles of debate should coexist. But I want to go a little bit further and maybe see if we can explain why multiple styles can coexist within one round. Um, because a lot of my viewers from PF, if they hear you say, oh, well, they can have their evidence, we can have our analysis and logic, then they will say, okay, we will have our evidence and we will not have the analysis and we will not have the logic.
Okay.
Um, because what's happened in PF, for example, is that people will say, well, I have cards, you have logical responses, card beats logical response, therefore I win. And so there's a disincentive that I think is sort of weird and artificial to creating your own logical analysis. That's something I want to change. And I think you can bring good insight to help convince people to change that. Um, so we'll say you're completely right about how, like, parley, for example, is valid. It is equal or better than PF, whatever. And we'll set that aside for now. And we'll only look at PF now. Okay? Um, then I will continue my steel manning. You say that certain things are clearly more true than others, right? Like Putin and Zelensky are not friends. That evidence is probably more true than the evidence that says that they are good friends. Um, but the problem is that seems to rely on intervention, right? Like, what if the judge does not know? What if you don't think that? What if, like, what if your judge actually is a conspiracy theorist or something? Like, shouldn't we minimize the extent to which the judge's prior background knowledge about the topic is brought into the debate as much as possible?
I mean, that must like be true though about evidence also. Like they're more inclined to believe that you say this card must be silly for like all of these reasons. But those reasons have to be logic. base to explain why one card is better than another. And like the judges, without the logic, the judge is more likely to just pick. But with the logic, the judge is less likely to just pick because they have something else to do on top of that. I mean, I also think like we all have these intuitions, which are just like we want as little intervention as possible in a debate round. And I think the way that you minimize that is explaining why things are true on top of just having them pick and choose and hoping that they choose correctly. Because like different judges are probably going to choose differently, like in the same way that like judges in logical formats of debate, and I'll talk about PF, will like choose certain arguments are more important to them than others when you're with parent judges because it's something they think about more. So like they could choose that they care about the economy more than something else. But if you explain why they shouldn't with actual warrants beyond just like the economy is being harmed, here's why we weigh economy higher. That's important. And I think also you're probably winning most of your debates off of logic, even if it's a very small part of the round, because weighing wins debates. So like if the thing that is winning you debates is what's winning you debates, why don't you let yourself win in more parts of the debate round rather than just in the end when you have to?
Damn, that's pretty convincing. But I will attempt to counter some of this. I think what people would probably say is the judges don't have to pick between evidence because even if one piece of evidence has more of your warrants under it, if the other piece of evidence, there's a different way to compare them that might be superior. For example, we could instead compare when the evidence was written. If your evidence is from the 1990s and my evidence is from yesterday, then mine's better, even if you have more logic behind yours. Or we can compare like the author qualifications or the methodology of the study, for example.
Uh, uh, okay, like I hear that and I'm like, you've got to be kidding. Wow. Okay. So like I think just like we're better than like people as people are better than that. Like there's no way you can seriously like imagine saying that to your history teacher, to your parents. Like just because this book was written a year ago and I have a book that was written yesterday, my book must be better. Like this doesn't make sense. Like in like any to me. But like even if it did make sense, I think in most circumstances, you are less likely to convince someone that that is the most important place to vote, or the most important thing, or the most valuable thing, rather than logic. And also, everything in a debate round is a time suck. Everything is a prioritization mechanism. And if you spend 5 minutes debating about who's more qualified, when that is an inherently subjective thing, they went to Harvard, but that's elitist to say that like going to Harvard is like a better school. Like I can imagine maybe that's something that would happen in a round and like our person is better. Like that is not as good of a use of time as like if they say, like they went to Harvard, so you should prefer evidence, give 3 minutes of explanation on that, and you're like, you could never really know who's a better person. Like they could be a crazy conspiracy theorist. Here's a bunch of logical reasons as to why this is more true. And if they also, the other thing about this, if logic doesn't exist in PF, which I'm hearing it doesn't to a large extent, you're doing it and they don't know how to respond to it, and the judges are getting it because it's intuitive, you're beating them. Because, like, the thing that is always true in debate, unfortunately, for the people who were once good, is that the things that made them good die out and people learn how to beat it and get better. And if you're the first person to do that, like, you are the one who becomes better. It's why, like, I became better than certain people a certain year because I was not that good and had learned new skills to try and get better. And since they weren't changing and like all these people were, it made us better. And why my novices were significantly better than me when I was a senior in high school.
Yeah, I agree. This is like if these, I don't know, it's like these are two different strategies and people are much better at one and much worse at the other. So if you get better at the other one, then you have like a comparative advantage over them. Um, Interesting. So, okay, so we've talked about how you can compare evidence better with logic rather than these other weird factors. Even methodology is probably suspicious. Like, I actually trust you considerably less
Yeah.
as a high schooler to investigate and compare between the methodologies of two articles.
Can you pull cards on methodology? Can you be like, I want a card on this, or is that in the
Yeah.
card?
No, you
It's
can.
in the
Yeah, you can
card.
be like,
Okay.
can I ask for the methodology of your study? And then they have to like, I don't know.
not real.
It is strange. Like people, I mean, people don't do this that often, but they sort of pretend that they would. And I don't really know like how you would do this. Like, yes, I guess A, sometimes cards respond to other cards, right? Like if you have like a scholarly debate, then like another scholar has written an article about why that article is wrong. That seems vanishingly rare though. The only other way to do it is to like look at the like admission of flaws in the original paper, which happens in lots of papers. Like they have a section where they're like, yeah, we know that this might be not true. But that's true of every paper. Like, is it just a race to find that first? I don't know. And it's sort of hard to compare as well. So I agree that these are weird ways of comparing, but it still seems that there are some instances in which evidence is very useful and might trump logic. I'll give you one such instance. If you don't have any evidence on your side, and I have a card that says, for example, one of the topics we were debating in PF a while back was about high-speed rail, like high-speed trains. And we found a card that said, on balance, everywhere you look, every time we've built high-speed rail anywhere, there has been a net increase in mortality accounting for all of the factors that are relevant. Obviously, most of your arguments on the other side, where you say high-speed rail is good, are going to be about mortality in some way or another. That's going to be like some terminal impact of them. And you'll have logic for why those probably should outweigh. But if I have this card that's like, no, you have reasons why that should outweigh, but it doesn't. If you look at history, if you look at when we've always done it, empirically, our arguments always come first. Like that seems very powerful. So how do you get around that?
Yeah. So, like, getting around it. I will say, like, intuitively to me, I don't like obviously PF's always going to have evidence, and I think there are values to some extent in a format that's built with evidence to have some extent. And that's maybe like a scenario where it is good. If you're in a round where something like that is given to you, I think the only way you do beat that, like, is with logic. Like, if it is true, here is why that is true. Here are all the reasons that high-speed rail has caused that mortality and et cetera, et cetera. Because to say that something causes net mortality, you could say like a lot of things, like cars as an existence have caused an increase in mortality. That's because there's a lot of car crashes, but it also meant a lot of people got to the hospital faster and were able to like have safer lives. And it also meant that like you had more ability to transport and see a lot of people around you who matter to you. And maybe that meant people's mental health was better, so they were able to live longer. Like a lot of things that are not quantifiable. And I think you can only get into that debate with conversations as to how a card gets from point A to point B, because like that's just like an argument that something is true, but you have to talk about like how you actually get there and if it's the high speed rail or not, maybe that's explicitly causing that. And I guess it's your incentive to say that it's not the high speed rail that's causing all of this mortality. And then on top of that, even if it is causing mortality, which maybe all of your cards say, or like you're going for the same impact, maybe you just kick out of the impact side, maybe you don't know, but here are all the extra benefits.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. I also think like it is always possible to say that an author is wrong with logic.
Oh yeah, I think that's also true. But like that gets into the whole like your evidence wrong, my evidence
Yeah.
wrong. Let's talk about the card, like whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's interesting. I guess if I said research is valuable for the activity, you would say yes, we can still have research.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. The last thing I want to say for the evidence case is it seems like some things that are basic assumptions require evidence. Like if we're talking about nuclear energy, we need to know how nuclear energy works. Like I if it's fission. Oh, last thing on the evidence question is there's some things that seem to just require evidence for to build the argument to begin with. Um, like nuclear energy as a topic, we need to know how nuclear energy works. Like it works through fission processes that release energy that could cause, like that's how you make the argument that it could explode, for example. And so how do you do that if you don't have any evidence? Like how do judges trust you? Because those seem like just facts, not logic.
As to like how nuclear
Yeah.
energy happened. Hmm. So I think like it's different based off of the format is like the first thing that I'll say. Um, Like in APDA, there's usually a good bit of background, so you understand how certain things happen.
Right.
People, though, what I have noticed in my experience is they make the arguments that they know how to make and the ways that they know how to make them. So maybe you're not going to talk about like the explicit scientific ways in which explosions happen, but you talk about like, oh, explosions happen, look to Chernobyl. And like you talk about the examples that you know or the knowledge that you do have because you read a lot. Or if you don't talk about that, you talk about some other harms that you know about. And like that's the truth of Parley and why it's like such a cool format, I think, because sometimes you're in trouble. Like sometimes if you just don't know and you don't have any idea what to say, you are like in deep like levels of trouble and that's okay. And you will learn and that is the best way you will learn because I was really bad at debate when I first started, like really, really bad. Like I was going 1-4 consistently. And I like had this topic which shouldn't have been that hard, and I chose it because I really didn't understand debate. And I was like, this house, the United Nations, should have a standing army, zero arguments, and I got destroyed. And I think that's like what you learn very frequently. Like you got to read because if you don't read, you won't know. And if you don't know, make some other general arguments that you think could apply. And maybe the debate goes in some other way that isn't exactly like the exact point of what a PF debate would come to because PF can tell you what's the most efficient argument to have on a topic. But it doesn't mean it's a less meaningful debate. It's
Mhm.
the debate you choose to have and engage with and have that conversation. But it's less about the actual topic maybe and more about like the round and the logic and the argumentation.
Yeah, this I think is a bit of a naive question, but what stops people from just saying that you're wrong about the things that you're bringing in that you've read?
Yeah, so I think like there is like a goodwill thing, which is like people just if you don't know why something is not true, there's like two things. First, like you're willing to trust to some extent unless you know for a fact that something's not true. That is true. A lot of people.
Mhm.
Other thing, and this is like more of a thing, like if someone tells you that something is true and you don't know if it's not true, the risk of telling them it isn't true and that being your only response is like too large because what if they're right and they can come back and tell you all of the reasons why they're right and all of the ways that they know they're right? And what if the judge knows that they're right and all of that kind of stuff? But also, that's why people respond more with logic because they don't only rely on something being true or
Yeah.
not. They're going to give you a bunch of reasons why it's not true. Or even if it is true, the impact matters less, or resort to weighing whatever they feel the most comfortable with to kick out of an argument they're uncomfortable with is what they're going to do. Which is why like people will wash things out and say things are less important and weigh against other things, which like yeah, is what a lot of parley people will tell you to do in rounds.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess one thing that people might ask is like, other than goodwill, it seems like there's a competitive incentive to just lie all the time. Like, why
Yeah.
can't I go in Parley and just like lie about every single fact that I know, and then lie about all of their facts as well and say they're wrong, I'm right. And then like for example, it seems like because there's no fact checking, some of these things have to be facts. Like there are not logical reasons for them. Like Ethiopia does not have a border with the coast. Um, that actually, like, I was watching a BP lecture recently, and like people made that argument that it has a coast, and like therefore we need it for like ports in the BP round. And then what do you do? Like, you don't have fact-checking power as a judge, right? So if someone says it does have a coast, the other person says no, it doesn't. But if that happens in every single fact in the round,
Yeah. So like I do think the goodwill is like really big in East Coast Parley, but like I won't just because it's student run and like the best students are often the ones running it. So like you have a real incentive not to be like that person who's lying in rounds to like first time novices. So it is like a huge thing. And it's also, I think, a huge thing in APTA because you don't want to be like considered dumb or like a liar or like all of those things. So there's all of that stuff. Like you don't want to be considered not knowledgeable and lie. But there are people who probably do have an incentive to do so. I think like my experience, and it's not like truth and it's not like a full answer. And in the same way that like evidence obviously has its issues, no evidence obviously has its issues, which is why like both formats can exist and like maybe they need a little bit of each other and why West Coast tries to. I don't know. Maybe Parley does need evidence. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I think APTA solves in a lot of ways with background. But I think what ends up happening is lies are just not, they end up not being the core part of the round. Like a lot of arguments can be true. Like maybe we don't need it because it's a coast, but maybe we do need it for resource production in like some other important way. So maybe it doesn't have a coast, but maybe this is true. And you take the arguments at their best. And I think that's like a core part of parliamentary BP, every type of debate that like requires not having evidence because you don't know if something's true or not. So like let's assume that everything they say is right. Let's assume that this is like not true. You still have to win the round regardless of that. And also the people who are just going to get up there and respond to things you're saying by just saying that's a lie, it's not true, if they have no other arguments, then obviously that's not enough for them to win the round
Right,
because
right.
they're not giving you offense. It's just defense. And it's like no one's going to vote on it. So the lie has to be backed up with some level of knowledge. And then if it's beaten, because like they're either better than you and they know it's a lie, or they don't know it's a lie, but they're beating you with 20 other places,
Yeah.
or you're better than them and it doesn't matter if your truth is truth because you can come up with other ways to beat them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It also seems like this is low-key a problem with logic itself, as in, or like this is something that applies to logic itself as well. Because, like, on the one hand, or th this applies to everything. Wait, what am I saying? So the problem that we've identified is that you can counter-assert against facts because there's no ability to fact check. The problem is that you can also counter-assert against cards because even if there's an ability to like fact check, you can't fact check between things that were not in the cards. So you can say that the card was lying about something, for example. And so that's also a problem with cards. And it's even a problem with logic itself, right? Like if we disagree about literally everything, we can disagree about first principles, and then the round just breaks. And so this problem that appears to stem from evidence not being able to be fact checked is in fact just an inherent problem with communication or any competitive activity that involves communication, rather than a problem with the lack of cards specifically.
I think to a large extent it's probably true. And like I mean, it's why I said at the beginning, like, this is not, debate is not a game of truth. It's a
Right.
game, in my experience, maybe not PF, of logic. And what we've decided is logically true by the end of the round because the facts all go away because when you never know what's true,
Yeah.
unless you decide a
Right.
truth is a first principle.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think I agree. I feel like the like this model of agreeing with them about certain things and then logically arguing from there, I think is probably the most coherent like way to do debate in any format. Um, okay. Cool. How did you how did you get better at debate? You are one of the first, I think you are the first person to ever w like top speak Nats as a freshman in APDA. So how did you do it?
How did I get better at debate? Okay, so I guess I can tell you about how I got into debate. So I joined debate when I was a freshman in high school, and I was horrendous. Like I remember so vividly how bad I was. 1-4, 2-3, 1-4, and then I went 4-1, thought I was the best debater in the entire world, had an entire year after of going 2-3 because I wasn't good and I was never good. I got lucky. And then I desperately wanted to be good at debate. I would debate every single weekend, but my school had no coach. There was no one good on our team. Me and my partner, we were the team. There was no team. And I had this good judge one day. It was like just a fantastic judge. Gave like this 30-minute RFD. I was like, wow, this guy's incredible. And then I have it again, and I was like, wow, this guy's incredible. And there was one day we had a horrible loss, and I DM'd him on Discord. You know who this person is. It was Ryan Lafferty.
Yeah.
And Ryan sent me a document of like all of his little lectures, and I watched them, and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And I like reached out to Ryan. I was like, Ryan, like we just want to get better. Will you teach me some things? And he never agreed to like coach us, he never took our money, but he did practice rounds for us every day. And suddenly, like so quickly, just because I had been like taught that the format actually operated this way, like that I should actually be taking a POI, that I don't know if people know what that, I don't know if that exists in PF.
It's not a
I
thing.
should actually I should actually be responding in LOC. I thought it was strategic to wait till MO because then they had less time to respond. Like there were things I just didn't know and I was told and I got beaten so many times by this really good debater. And I got so much better that the next year I went from going 2-3 at every single tournament to like winning five in that singular year. And
Wow.
meeting people who are that impressive and helpful is wonderful. But bigger than that, once I had the tools to know how to debate because someone had just given me like a chance, someone had just like anything to like teach me how to be better. I was motivated myself. I read so much about the world and like instantly became far more knowledgeable. I watched every lecture that was possibly available, read every one of Ryan's resources and like the matter file, and I just got better. And that's like, I mean, I got really lucky, but I think there are a lot of people out there in the world who are so happy to help. So many people who are so willing to do so because someone helped them, or not even someone helped them, they wish someone would have helped them.
Yeah,
That's been my experience for sure.
yeah. It's all about sending that one DM, you know?
It really is. Like, you never know where it will get you.
Yeah, for sure. That's crazy. What a guy. But also like crazy good on you to be willing to devote that much time and willing to reach out to people who you think are better than you to like, I guess, get destroyed in a bunch of practice rounds until you get better. I think that's really like probably the singular best way to get better at debate. It's just
You
like,
have to want it. Like, the
yeah.
truth of it is, I mean, a lot of people have always been, and I've always been very envious of those people who can just like never practice a day in their life and go out and win tournaments. And like what I've heard of like Roy's story, that's what it sounds like. Like people like that are so cool. I'm not that. I've never been that. And like for people like me, you have to work really, really hard and you have to put in a lot of effort and you have to want it. And like if you do, I promise you you can be really like incredible someday.
Yeah, maybe you can top speak after Nets.
You can top speak after Nats. Like, whoa, that was crazy. Like I never thought that would be me. If you don't think that would be you, it could be.
True,
Like you
true.
never know.
And over Ryan, by the way.
Over like yeah, imagine you any one of your kids that you're currently coaching could out well they can't outspeak you, but maybe they could do better than you spoke at Nats when you
That's
were here.
it sucks. I told them maybe they can win it finally.
They can win it. Yeah, do it.
True. Um, well, thank you for telling me how you got better. The next questions that I have are about how debate can get better, perhaps.
Oh, it's
Um,
wonderful.
yeah, some very difficult questions for sure, but worth having. So the first question is, what do you think is the value of debate? Like, what keeps you motivated? What keeps you doing it?
Okay. So I think like the best answer to this, and I could give you my personal answer, but I think the best answer is finding what is valuable to you. Because debate is only valuable if the people find value in it, and everyone has something different that they find valuable in it.
Mhm.
And you won't enjoy it. You'll be a bad influence on the community if you can't find something that keeps you there other than just like the inertia. And I think that's really important that people do find that value. For me, what's always been valuable, like I found debate at a time when I think I struggled to find my voice. I think a lot of people do coming into like freshman year of high school and like you're 4 years away from college and everything's changing and like all of your friends are different and whatever. And debate allowed me to find a way to put a lot of like thoughts I had about the world into a place where I could speak for 7 minutes and 8 minutes and no one would interrupt me and they would talk back at me and respect me and like all of that would happen. And I found that really, really cathartic. And I
Yeah.
found that the people who helped me there were really, really helpful. And I think like that feeling of community that I got, and not only community, but like ability to be heard is something that like keeps me coming back, partly because of nostalgia and everything else. And I think as I've gotten older, it's meant more things to me. It's met like really great friends and really great people. And I think debate's really valuable because of that. And it's meant a different kind of learning, a learning that you're not able to do in school. And it's meant people who will talk to you about those things who are really interested, just like you are. And it's meant like people who are just not only people, but like a place where you are always going to be listened to, where nothing else matters, where you shut out school for a week and it's just like a place that you're there. And I think that's always what's been powerful for me, but I don't think that's what it has to be for everyone. And I like hope people can find their own value.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I was talking with actually my cousin who's like in grad school for English. He reads a lot of philosophy. I was talking with him about competition as like an idea recently. And he was talking about how like maybe there's something inherently like fascistic about competition where like you are like pulling yourself up by pushing other people down. There's like this zero sum nature of it where like everyone has to be like losers in some way at one point or another. And like there's something like violent about that. I'm not convinced that that's necessarily true or inevitable, but I think there is something true about that. You know, like debate as a competition, like so many people care about wins and losses. And I have always struggled throughout debate in balancing this with the value of debate. Like, I think debate is valuable partially because people seek to win, but also I think that like there are real critiques of the competitive aspects of it. So how do you balance that?
Yeah. So there have been times in my life, I'm sure in most people's lives, where I've been very just like disgusted by debate and what like the format was, where people would go into rooms and were just so mean to each other and like forgot that you were talking to another human and like the arguments that they would make were so like black and white and refused to engage with the reality of the world. And I hated it. And I was like, what is this thing that I have known and loved? And I think I've struggled with that before and like that desire to like, oh, if you just say that they're stupid, you're more likely to win. But like if you have the real debate, you're more likely to feel fulfilled. So I think what I did was for me and like a large portion of that was I had the debates that were fulfilling to me. I made an argument that I thought was powerful in rounds, but like I'll be honest, in rounds where I knew I could probably win regardless. And then in rounds where I didn't know if I could win regardless, I it didn't really matter because like the people around me were just such good debaters that like I was going to be having a fruitful, really real conversation regardless. But like when I knew I could choose between definitely winning versus probably winning, I chose probably if it made me feel like a more fulfilled and better person. And I didn't do that my junior year when I was better than I was when I was a senior. And I did do it my senior year. And I think I walked out of that year a whole lot happier and a whole lot more fulfilled in that activity.
Yeah, that's a good point. What are these fulfilling rounds like? Like what do you do differently?
Okay, so for me, I think it's gonna be different for everyone. I really like love there are certain topic areas that I love. Um, I can like I love feminism debate rounds. I love social justice just in general. I think it's a lot of fun. And I love like wackier stuff. And for me in those rounds, those were first rounds where I would like try and put real arguments that I truly thought forward or like have like little pleasantry moments where I thought like it was powerful before the round. So that was like the first thing. But the thing that was like always really impactful to me in debate was being as this is probably weird as defensive as possible. So like pretending that like their arguments were the focus of the round. Like most of my PMR was spent talking about their arguments and how my arguments outweighed them or beat them, but specifically focusing on those arguments more because it meant I was having the real conversation as to like why they're 75% right, but because we're 25% more right, like you should vote for us here. And
Yeah.
that was really, really fulfilling for me. Um, I also always found it fulfilling to like hear a new argument that I wouldn't have thought of before. I also always found it really, really fulfilling not to lose, but to lose against people who were better than me and who like had aggressively beat me in rounds. Like my second ever out round, I lost to like a fantastic team in APDA. And I just like never have I felt in such like I have, but in so long that I was so just like there was just no world in which I won that round. And it was really fulfilling because I learned a lot. And I've always found that really like nice too.
Tell me about that round. Who was it and how did like what was
It was
fulfilling
it
about it?
was it was Roy. Um, and this was my second ever tournament. And really my first because it was after BU novice, which is all novices. So it's all first time groups. So this is my first real tournament. And it had been horrible. I was like, I don't know if every format does this, but like they do high-low pairing in APTA. And I had had horrible speaks my first round. So I was just like hitting the best team at the tournament round after round after round after round. It was horrendous. And I had won my first out round. I was like, oh my God. And I got into this round. They're like, what do you want us to run? Whatever you want. And then they're like, we'll defer you the gov if you want it. Because they just like thought that there was no world in which we were beating them. Like they were right. And we picked up. I like actually don't know why we did that. We were like, no, we don't want the gov. And they run this case, which is like about it's an anime case. I'm sure you know it. Um, and like we just like don't see it coming. Like I think we make all of the right arguments,
Hmm.
and then like the I have this just one memory
Wait,
of
wait.
like
Was this Infinite Tsukuyomi, the Naruto
yes,
one?
yes, yes, yes.
And it was
I
Roy
was
Ale or just
no, it wasn't Ole. It was Roy and Nathra. Um,
Nathra, Nathra, yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. And they had this like one moment in PMR that I remember. Like, okay, so I knew it was over, and like LOR, like I just knew it was we were in bad shape. And they had this like Roy gets up in PMR. He's like, there are two things they say that are important. One that's new in LOR, but I like it, so I'll respond to it. And like at that point, when you know they're not new calling and you know all of the arguments are like that bad, and I walked out and I asked him, I was like, what could we have done better? And he talked to me, and I like felt like I learned a whole lot about debate in that moment. Like I actually think that was the most I had ever grown as a debater, like since I was a sophomore in high school. Like literally just that 10-minute conversation where he explained to me how I should have used the background to debate the case differently and what I should have done differently. Because I didn't know you could use warrants from the background. Like I didn't know any of that. And I learned so much. And that was really cool.
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic round. Roy is, I think he's incredibly good specifically at doing that thing in the very end of the round where he's like, let's pretend they're completely right about everything. Why do we still win? Or like, let's take them at their absolute highest. And that's something he did, I think, only really starting in APDA. And yeah, it was very impressive. I remember there was one round where I debated with him in a motions tournament and we were debating this team and they had some like pretty good arguments, but I thought we were winning on the line by line against all of those arguments. I was MG, so I was like responsible for like smacking all of them down and playing whack-a-mole. And then in PMR he gets up and he's like, let's pretend they're right about this and this and this and this and this. I'm like, what are you doing? There's no way we can win if they're right about all five of those things. And he was like, even if all of those things are true, we still have this part that is more important than any of them. I was like, whoa, like I would have just smacked them down on all of them. I feel like we've had similar experiences learning from him. What do you think is your most fulfilling like round? Because I know this is maybe a very fulfilling loss, but what's like one of the most fulfilling rounds that you've had in general?
I've had a couple. I'll say one of them because it's on YouTube so people can watch it. And
Yo,
then
I'll
like
link it. I'll link it in the description.
um it was like a round and it was with me and three of my friends. Like we were all very close friends. And like I genuinely just didn't care like who won the round. We were probably like we were four like very like knowledgeable debaters, and it was four of our best topic areas. It was a social justice topic about opulence and art. And it was like probably one of the best rounds I've seen in a very long time. They made fantastic arguments, and like I just felt like very fulfilled being in there with all of my friends, like knowing that we were all doing a good job and I lost, and it was like still a fantastic, fantastic round.
Dude, I feel like that's the best feeling. Like when you lose, but you still feel so proud of what you created in the round, then I think you are starting, like, it's proof that you're starting to develop a mental model of the value of debate that doesn't depend on the outcome, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like, in my view, my philosophy of debate is like, it creates more value if you try your best to win every round. Like that's part of what goes into it. But the value itself, I think there's like an aesthetic of debate that like the interactions between two teams that are both striving for victory over the other creates this like new content, this new like artistic expression through the round that I think is that's what's valuable, you know, and being a part of making that happen, I think is incredibly like makes
Yeah.
me feel very fulfilled.
I
Uh,
agree. I think like it's important to we put that round on YouTube because it was all of our friends. We wanted people to see that like you could be happy for other people and like you can see us like clapping for each other when the other
yeah.
team like it's just very I think it's an important thing. Even though like I obviously prefer winning, I way less remember the rounds that I won that like just washed by and were great than the rounds that like I may have won or may have lost but were meaningful.
Yeah, 100%. It's the same for me. I mean, I've done. I've been in debate for 9 years, and the rounds I remember the most are by far the ones where like I felt like we all did our best and created something more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
Um, there's something that clicked for me. I feel like it's crazy. You're having these revelations way before I did. But like there's something that clicked for me in senior year of APDA actually, where I was like, you know what? I feel like I've done basically everything competitively I wanted to. Why don't I just like do weird shit now? It's like create weird cases, try to push the boundary of like what is even acceptable in this event, and hopefully do that in a fulfilling way. I feel like that's why I like case debate, by the way, because I feel like cases debate allows you more freedom to do that. Um, but yeah, I think more people should write like really weird, fulfilling cases. And I guess they have started to. Like a lot of these cases, it used to be way back that everyone just read like only the most strategic thing. But now people are reading things that are actually more like personal to them and stuff. I feel like that's a good trend. What
Yeah.
then is your like favorite case that you've written so far? You've only been in 1 year, so
Okay. I have to think. I have quite a few cases. So I have a couple. Um, let me think if I can think of my. Okay, my true favorite, I'll tell you after this because it's never been run. I wrote it for my Nats quarters. I
okay.
wrote it for Nats quarters and lost in Nats octaves.
Yeah.
But but I have others. So my favorite case, and this is like going to be like gross to a lot of people, so I'll give you two answers, is this case I wrote about stock shorting in South Korea. And it's my favorite not because it's spec finance, but because like no one would expect me, novice girl, like person who like probably doesn't look like does much finance to run spec finance case. Like that's what you expect from like really no hate, sweaty U Chicago team
Yeah, it's
because
true.
that's what you expect. And I didn't know anything, and I spent like weeks researching to write like a really cool case that none of my partners will run with me because they think it's like crazy, but is like really, really fun for me to run, and I really enjoy. But my other favorite case, which is much more like approachable, is this case about like you're an 18-year-old girl, and you have breathing problems and you can't breathe out of your nose, and you're getting surgery. Do you get a nose job as well? Like assuming you've hated your nose your whole life. And it's like a lot of things that I enjoy, body image and all of that kind of stuff to talk about. And it comes from like my life experience. And I think it's really cool to run cases like that, but not only because I like them, because they create very meaningful rounds, because obviously that's somewhat open. Like there are just arguments to make about why you shouldn't. And those cases are fun because you're actually engaging with an op who's happy to be there. And like your PMR matters, like versus like can be pre-written.
Yeah, oh, 100%. I feel like that is like you've honed in on what really makes a lot of debates valuable, in my opinion, which is like being in a round where both teams are happy to be there and like happy to be debating these arguments up until the end, even if they think they might be losing. I think that like people don't think about this quite enough as I wish they would, especially in high school. Like everyone is only thinking about themselves in high school, but you should be creating rounds that are like maximally valuable for your opponents as well and win, also beat them,
Also
but
be good.
beat them in a way where they feel like they've gained something and they're happy to have been in that debate. Yeah, 100%.
Could not agree more.
How do you think people can like engage in debate in more valuable ways? You've already spoken a little bit about this and your own experience. Like, what is your best advice for other people?
Okay. Again, like take some time, like think. Like sit in your room, you have summer, like think about why you do what you do. Like it can be like I get the people who are like I'm doing this so I can have like a good future and like have good skills for work or for college. It can be that, but find something else. Like find some other place where you have value in this activity and think for yourself. But some general thoughts and general advice that like I think matters when you're going into a round. First, remember that the people across from you are people. They have feelings, and it hurts their feelings if you're mean to them during cross or if you laugh at them and call their arguments stupid and they hear it behind your back when you're talking about how ridiculous the judge's decision was. And the judge also has feelings and is a person. So remember that you are not debating against robots, you are debating against people. This applies everywhere and anywhere, and people, I think, just need to be better about this because, like, you could make someone cry because I'm sure you've cried over debate. So, like, don't, maybe not, but like a lot of people cry over debate. So, don't make someone else cry. Um, the
I
second
have,
thing
by the
is
way. This is true.
I have to. The second thing is like find something about like for PF, for Parley, anything. For PF, I'll say it this way. Find something about the topic that is interesting to you. Like at my school, like people would like there'd be one person who would write the case on the bus to the tournament because like and that was it. And they like didn't do any of the prep. But like I doubt I know none of them really enjoyed those tournaments before besides the friends on their team. Because like the people are great, but enjoy the activity too. So whether it's research, whether it's like a progressive argument that you find really valuable, whether it's a round or a debater style that you find really valuable, like dive into that more and find interest in the world. And even if it's not an actual debate, but like you read an article that brings you to another article, like that brings you to an interest, that's great because like actually finding value in what you're talking about matters. And I think like the last thing I'll say is think about that you're talking, and I'm sure like if you talk to Ryan, I imagine he said this, you're talking about real people in your rounds. Remember that. Think about that. Um, research that maybe if it's something that's interesting to you and learn more so you can more accurately portray what's happening and not use things or people as means to an end. Maybe believe some of what you say. You don't have to in debate. Debate's about like keeping an open mind. But like think about some things that you do believe because I often find that debate has made me opinionless. And I hate that it's made me opinionless. And I think more people should be willing to like have thoughts and opinions and like ideas like that.
Dude, 100%. And like emotions. Like we're always told when we're debating in high school, you should like completely separate yourself and your whole being from your arguments. Your arguments are just tools to help you win, and that is all. But I think I've personally found debate so much more valuable when I started intentionally like inserting myself back into my arguments and becoming more emotionally invested in them as well. Not in like an unhealthy way. Like there are definitely unhealthy ways to do this. Don't like take it as an attack on yourself and like your identity if you lose a round or something. Um, but it's really powerful to like use arguments that you genuinely believe about things that you know to be real and that you think about on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think it's like super, super true. And I also think it makes you become a better person. Like
Mhm.
when you think about what matters to you and like understand it and can articulate it, it like helps you find a better sense of self, which I think is easy to lose in debate when you go too deep and like you're only living for those weekends, which if you get really competitive, I think a lot of people like do fall into that.
Yeah, for sure. Last question that I have for you is how do you think that the community, I mean, there's so many different communities of debate, but how do you think any given community can like shift toward a more valuable debate space that's like more inclusive, for example?
Yeah. Okay. So like I think it starts with, again, like I said this, but kindness. Like, remember that the people are people, have conversations about how people are people. Don't make comments about how, oh, I'm hitting like this random underfunded small school. Like, this will be an easy round. Like, nothing to worry about here. Talk to them. Like, make them feel included. If you see people who do not feel included, like, talk to them more. And I think the NYPDL does this in a really, really great way. And I think people who are older with more resources should maybe do that. Offer to do joint practices with schools who have up and coming teams. Like focus more on things that you want to see. And I think just kindness is like the first step. I also think just like generally like if you want to see change like somewhere in some atmosphere, you can't just like keep it in and talk about it with the people around you necessarily. Talk about it loudly, say things that matter, say it to people who matter, get a lot of people together and like actually make it happen. Put like some action to your words. And I think that's really important and valuable because I think there's a lot of issues that exist in debate. I mean, sexism certainly exists in debate, and it's something that you can only fix if you talk about it and like engage with it because there are a lot of other people who feel the same way. And I think that's really important. And like beyond that, like I don't know, everyone should sleep more. It makes you nicer. Eat more during debate, be less stressed. Like if your friend looks upset, if your partner looks upset, if you think your partner lost a round, don't yell at them for it and make them feel bad about it. Like we've all done it. I mean, I don't know if I've ever done that, but like maybe I've done like I can't believe you did that or walked away in the other direction because I didn't want to be around them. Like we've all had those moments. Just don't like try your best not to whenever you possibly can. Be nicer to your friends. Be nice to your friends when you're in your rounds. Be a person and like, I don't know, sportsmanship matters.
Yeah, for sure. I think these things about like being intentional about how you use the community and your role of the community and the power of the community too. Like these resonate a lot with me, and I hope they resonate a lot with my PF audience because I think PFers don't really think about this. Like PF is such a wide event that's very sort of diffuse, if that makes sense. Like there's lots of mini circuits that like together constitute the broader circuit and there's lots of people involved. And so I think a lot of students don't realize the power they have to make change. Like they understand that they can make change step by step with like theory arguments in rounds and stuff like that. But that's like there's so much other change that can be made outside of like theory arguments and debate. Like there's so much possibility to spill up into change and really make ripples, no matter who you are or what your role is in the community. If you make your voice louder, people will listen, and this will change the norms in the circuit in like very tangible ways that I definitely didn't realize when I was on the circuit. Um, like just a few people talking about things more and making those conversations become a bigger space at tournaments, for example. That makes a big difference. It doesn't solve everything. There's probably no way to solve everything, but it puts us many steps closer to doing that. So
Yeah.
be intentional. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on this call. I've greedily eaten up a lot of your time. So I
Good.
appreciate it. Is there any last wisdom that you have for the audience?
I don't know. Remember why you joined debate. Remember like that it was meant to be fun. Always find like that joy. It's
Yeah.
important.
Wise words. Okay. Thank you so much.